Imagine a world where the very structure of the state demands the assassination of its own children.
Right.
A world where the shadow of God on earth, the Sultan and Caliph, is caged and abandoned like a sick animal. Now, what happens when the only person left to witness this ultimate betrayal, and maybe to save the whole regime, is a highly educated, deeply arrogant, and physically mutilated former slave?
Well, that is the premise that drops you right into the terrifying opulence and really the psychological paranoia of 17th century Ottoman Constantinople.
Yeah.
And that's the heart of Zülfü Livaneli's masterpiece. It isn't Gozu, or for us, The Eye of the Viper.
This novel is so much more than just a historical drama, isn't it? It feels like this profound, almost claustrophobic exploration of the human soul under the pressure of, well, absolute power.
Absolute and completely arbitrary power.
Exactly.
We've been given some truly incredible source material for this. We are doing a deep dive into excerpts from the book itself, specifically the 1996 edition by Zülfü Livaneli. And we should say, if you're looking for a great starting point, a fantastic preliminary analysis that really bridges this complex literature with the dense history.
You have to check out the work being done by the Daily Books YouTube channel.
Oh, absolutely. Their approach to synthesizing history and literature is, well, it's the kind of in-depth exploration we strive for here. It's exceptional.
It really is. So if you want more literary explorations like this one, we highly, highly recommend you seek out their content.
And what we're doing today is we're sort of taking their excellent foundation, and we're going to try to drill down even further into the psychological and thematic core of the novel.
Our mission is to explore the novel's sophisticated structure, its most shocking events, and the historical grounding that Livaneli so meticulously weaves in. And we're going to focus especially on the terrifyingly unique voice of the man guiding us through this descent into chaos.
And we have to acknowledge the author, Zülfü Livaneli. He published this book back in 1996. And the sources are clear that he explicitly positioned this work as a humble footnote to the grand works of the great 17th century chroniclers.
The historian Naima and the legendary traveler Evliya Çelebi.
Exactly. And that context is so crucial. Livaneli didn't invent the instability of the period. He just framed it in this incredibly personal way.
And that period, the 17th century, I mean, it was a real low point for the empire, wasn't it?
A total low point. It was just plagued by weak sultans, incredibly powerful Valida sultans and grand viziers, economic collapse.
And massive military uprisings, the Janissaries, the Sipahis.
All of it. So the fictional horror we're about to talk about in The Eye of the Viper is just firmly rooted in documented instability, real omens, and massive political upheaval.
The book really stands out because Livaneli takes that grand historical canvas, that whole age of instability, and he filters it. He filters it through the intensely personal, damaged perspective of one of the palace's most feared figures.
Let's talk about that figure. The narrator is Habish Suleiman.
The Darsada Asas, the chief black eunuch.
Right. And when we say he lives in staggering luxury, we mean staggering gold leaf everywhere. These priceless Iznik tiles, sable furs, jeweled headdresses.
The Marasa Surguslar. And yet, his commentary, his voice is just laced with this profound contempt for all of it.
He is, you could argue, the second most powerful person in the empire.
Yeah.
He's the absolute ruler of the harem, operating in the Gate of Felicity section of the palace.
But he's so much more than just an administrator.
Oh, far more. The sources really emphasize his intellectual prowess. He's a multilingual scholar. He speaks Latin, Greek, Italian, Arabic, Persian.
But his real frustration, the thing that seems to eat at him, is that he feels this accumulation of high knowledge is just utterly wasted.
Wasted on what he constantly dismisses as wretched mortals.
Yeah.
You know, the women and the servants of the palace.
And this high intellect, it just feeds his profound, internalized sense of superiority, both racial and personal.
It does. He is intensely proud of his African heritage from Habichistan or Ethiopia. He truly believes his race possesses specific superior physical traits. Dark skin, thick lips, curly hair.
He doesn't just manage the harem. He sees himself as a Kamil insan.
A perfect or complete human. A singular sage who is guiding us, the reader, through a world that's populated by the ignorant.
Which creates such a fascinating and frankly a challenging lens for the whole story. He's the ultimate insider, right? He controls access to the Sultan himself.
But he views the entire imperial machine, including the royal family, with this arrogant disdain. He justifies his own power not through divine right, but through his own perceived intellectual superiority and resilience.
The story kicks off right at the height of this power, but it's also at the moment of his deepest vulnerability. So let's get into the initial cracks that start to appear, the omens and portents that come right before the ground coup.
Habes Suleiman's entire self-image as this Camille Insan rests on his ability to predict things and to control them.
Yeah.
He claims he has this rare accumulation of knowledge and foresight that sets him way above the millions of people who just drift through life. And he rules the harem with absolute authority, relying on this one incredibly effective tool for intimidation.
His famed smile.
Exactly. He describes it as this calculated grin that makes other people bow instantly in fear. It's a look of profound disdain that somehow simultaneously grants forgiveness and instills absolute terror. It is the ultimate instrument of his power.
But the novel introduces this fascinating, subtle counterpoint to all that self-confidence.
Which is that he can never actually see this famous smile himself.
Right, because he keeps the silver-backed mirror in his rooms permanently turned away, believing it brings bad luck.
So he has to judge his own dominance solely by the terror he sees reflected in the eyes of the women he controls. And he's always compensating, carrying this thick stick and just relishing the visible fear it puts into the beautiful, but as he says, pale women of the harem.
And the central irony, the core of it all, is that this self-proclaimed perfect human admits to one tiny flaw.
A tiny flaw in the lower part of his body.
A chilling, so understated reference to his castration, the very thing that was the prerequisite for his status.
It's the foundation of his wealth, his influence, and at the end of the day, his ultimate insecurity.
And it is this foundational insecurity that is immediately targeted by the very first and most personal of the ill omens. The narrative takes this dramatic, dark turn right when the inauspicious omens begin.
The first sign is the destruction of something incredibly intimate and symbolic. It's the shattering of a jar.
A jar containing the most precious part of his body.
This isn't just a symbolic loss for him, it's existential.
He explains it, doesn't he? He says that eunuchs, as incomplete men, noxon itr, they can't enter paradise.
Right, so he had carried his own severed organ, or maybe a symbolic substitute, the organ of another young boy.
He carried it in that jar, often around his neck, even when he slept, because he believed it would render him whole for the afterlife.
So when that jar smashes on the marble floor, scattering its contents, it's a profound personal catastrophe for him.
It's not just about losing power, it's the physical manifestation of his own eternal damnation.
It's a chilling piece of personal foreshadowing for the imperial doom that follows literally right after.
Because the omens, they just scale up so rapidly, moving from his personal trauma to this widespread, almost apocalyptic fear across the entire empire.
The sources paint this picture of total cosmic alignment against the state. We hear about a Naqshbandi sheikh who has this vivid dream of a giant hand just snatching the sun from the sky, leaves him completely traumatized.
And the physical world responds in kind. Constantinople suffers the largest earthquake since the days of the Megarians. It's a 2-month horror show.
The buildings are shaking like autumn leaves. The Bosphorus waters surge 10 full minarets high. It devastates all the precious seaside mansions of the rich.
And if that wasn't enough, massive fires consume the city. They burn so fiercely that the piles of ash actually reach the palace garden.
The fires cast this ghostly glow in the moonless nights, making the whole city feel like a giant burning pyre. The empire is, well, it's physically and spiritually disintegrating.
And the astrologers, the official predictors, they just confirm what everyone's fearing. They note that the Sultan's fate line had passed Mars and was plunging toward the ominous sphere of Saturn.
The Zuhal Berku. Doom. Certain doom. The message couldn't be clearer. The state is doomed.
But the truly extraordinary detail, the one that makes Livaneli's use of historical rumors so effective, is the bizarre omen that arrives from the provinces.
Ah, yes. The supposed virgin birth of an elephant.
This sounds almost mythological, like something from an ancient Greek text, not 17th century Anatolia.
And it highlights this collision between rural superstition and imperial propaganda. Peasants from the Turl region, they transport a preserved dead baby elephant to the Sivas governor.
Preserved in a honey-filled goatskin.
Right, and they swear that this monstrous birth happened to a virgin daughter of a virgin in their village.
The girl's story is fantastic. She claims a gigantic column, which she then realized was an elephant's leg or trunk, grabbed her and immersed her in a gooey flesh, which led to a 2-year pregnancy.
The reaction of the authorities is what's really key here. The local Subashu, the chief of police, he immediately had the calf strangled.
And the governor's fear was purely political, wasn't it?
Completely. He was terrified the story would spread. He thought infidels and rival powers would write sagas mocking the Ottoman provinces, saying that women were giving birth to elephants under Ottoman rule.
So this wasn't about suppressing a miracle, it was about suppressing destabilizing satire.
It was about image control. And the regime's response was swift and horrifying. The governor immediately imprisoned the girl, her parents, and 70 witnesses to completely silence the news.
And then sent the embalmed calf straight to the Sultan in Istanbul.
This whole episode, it just underscores how, in a state that was already racked by economic collapse and Janissary revolts, the greatest existential threat wasn't always a foreign army.
It was a widely believed rumor.
Exactly. The fact that the regime had to resort to mass imprisonment and cover-ups to control the narrative around a dead baby elephant just shows you how fragile their grip on power really was.
And immediately following these omens, the Sultan's fate is sealed by political treachery. We move from cosmic warning to immediate physical collapse.
And Habib Suleiman's loyalty to his master is, well, it's absolute. It borders on the divine.
He idolizes the Sultan, the shadow of God on earth, the Caliph, the ruler of 3 continents from Baghdad to Hungary. The Sultan is, in his eyes, the only being created without any fault.
This sense of divine order is immediately shattered. Habib Suleiman witnesses the coup firsthand. He's hiding behind a marble column when he hears this heartbreaking scream erupt from the harem.
And the visual the Livaneli provides is devastating. The world ruler, the commander of millions, being dragged away like a sacrificial calf for slaughter by his own palace guards.
The Aziz and the Sultan is screaming, "They are killing me! Is there no loyal servant who ate my bread to stop these tyrants?"
And the treason is legitimized so quickly by the presence of the highest state officials. The Kubalti viziers and the Sheikh al-Islam, they're guiding the helpless Sultan into the tiled room of the harem Dairezi.
Accompanied only by his concubine, Gulbuddin. And the sources detail the interment that follows as this deliberate act of psychological torture.
They brick up the window,
leaving only a small slot, big enough for a dish. The door is sealed with molten lead. The Sultan, the emperor, is literally buried alive in his own luxurious prison, constantly crying out, demanding to know by what right they can find him.
And the powerful Habib Suleiman, the man whose smile terrorized thousands.
He's completely paralyzed, frozen in fear and indecision, crying hysterically, the sources say, for the first time since childhood.
It just shows the limit of his power, doesn't it? His authority only works within the established structure.
And when that structure implodes, he's just an unarmed man hiding behind marble. He's lamenting the ingratitude of the servants who were raised up by the Sultan's generosity.
He's probably thinking about that vizier who was given golden slippers when he was just a barefoot boy.
Probably. And he resolves to investigate, just desperately hoping his master's fate might somehow be reversed.
This paralyzing moment of fear, this deep betrayal, it forces the narrator into one of the most compelling flashbacks in the whole novel.
The traumatic origin of his own power and identity in Africa.
This transition feels like a psychological necessity for him. His present fear triggers the memory of his foundational trauma.
He recounts being stolen from Habeshistan, from Ethiopia at age 12, crammed into a foul-smelling, airless ship's hold, packed like sardines, where the dead were just thrown overboard daily.
And then, the horrific process that made him a commodity, the valorization process.
The ritual of castration at a port stop that instantly increased his worth to 3 to 5 times that of a normal slave boy.
The account is just so detailed and deliberately shocking. He describes the boiling chili water they used as a wash.
The tight binding of his small body, the swift, agonizing, sickle-shaped cut that severed the organ, the gushing blood, and then the insertion of a metal plug to staunch the flow.
The most torturous part, maybe, is the demand for immediate performance. He was forced to walk right afterward, despite the brutal mutilation.
All while surrounded by the terrifying screams of the other mutilated children. That heavy smell of blood, he says, it haunts him decades later.
And this detail is pivotal. His high status is built directly on this profound physical wound and psychological trauma. He achieved his position only by becoming a Noksan Ihtiyar, an incomplete man.
Defined by the very thing that was taken from him by the state he now serves. His intellectual superiority is just a shield against the profound shame and vulnerability that's inherent in his physical state.
As the chaos unfolds in the palace, Constantinople itself reflects the deep trauma and instability. The weather, even the weather, turns bizarre and destructive.
The climate mirrors the political environment perfectly. Habe Suleiman observes that scorching desert winds, the Samieli, are blowing at the same time as icy northern gales.
It causes this debilitating sickness across the city. People were suffering from this aching misery. They were divided between those who felt they were burning up and those who felt they were freezing.
And this general misery just fuels the political fire. The Grand Vizier, the former chief administrator, he knows he's doomed and he's gone into hiding.
And the Janissaries and the Sipahis, the elite military forces, they are howling through the streets demanding his death. Their power is completely unchecked.
The sources recount that the vizier tries to use the only power he has left, his immense wealth.
He offers 300, then 3,000.
Then a final, desperate bid of 4,000 purses gold to save his life. But the new Grand Vizier has already secured his execution warrant.
So he's just prolonging the negotiations.
Just to make sure the state treasury benefits from the vizier's final desperation before he seals his fate. It's so cynical.
The execution scene is just gruesome. It really demonstrates the capricious, theatrical nature of Ottoman justice during this period.
It truly is. The Grand Vizier is awakened from his nightmares by the famed gypsy executioner,
who performs the strange, almost respectful ritual of kissing the vizier's knee
before quickly strangling him with the silk cord. The death is so swift that the enormous man dies without being able to recite the Kalimi Shahadat,
the Islamic testimony of faith, a profound spiritual insult.
But the degradation has only just begun. The vizier's naked, enormously obese body, and the narrator describes it as a giant stuffed sausage.
A dev bir bumbar dolmasi.
That's the one. It's tied crosswise onto a horse and paraded through the streets of Istanbul, exposed to the mob's derision.
And its destination is the hippodrome, specifically the Mishum Zinara, the inauspicious plane tree.
This location is historical. It was the traditional spot where executed state officials were hanged and left to rot. The narrator observes that this place created this bizarre silent zone where no wind dared blow.
As if even nature was afraid of the human horror held by that tree.
And the spectacle of the dead vizier, this massive fat body delivered to the silent tree, it creates this moment of charged silence that is then just violently broken by the mob.
This is where the scene moves beyond a simple execution into, ritualistic, superstitious butchery.
That's the perfect word for it. A janissary shouts that the vizier's fat can cure the aches and pains, the suzin.
The widespread misery caused by the strange, debilitating weather.
And the crowd janissaries, boatmen, porters, even students, they attack the naked corpse with knives.
They're cutting off chunks of his fat to use as medicinal wrappings. The narrator even notes that the vizier's massive body visibly shrinks as the crowd butchers him.
Livaneli's prose here is stark and unforgettable. He says that even the wind hiding in the tree of human fruit never saw such a sight.
Wow.
It just speaks volumes about the level of public desperation and the volatile nature of justice when the empire's second most powerful man can be ritually dismembered for folk medicine by the very people he governed.
The line between absolute power and total degradation is thin indeed.
And with the old regime ritually destroyed, the need for succession is urgent. The crisis accelerates the enthroning of the new sultan.
Who is just a child.
A child. And this transition is orchestrated entirely by the Grand Valide Sultan, the mother of the deposed sultan who successfully pulled off the coup.
The Ottoman throne is dramatically moved out into the open courtyard of the palace, an unprecedented act that just signals the collapse of traditional court protocol.
And she presents her 7-year-old grandson. He is terrified, dressed in the symbols of supreme power, utterly confused by the bowing crowds and the menacing atmosphere.
The child is hoisted onto the throne by the ulema and the high officials. And everyone, from the Sheikh al-Islam to the viziers, bows and utters that chilling phrase, Bismillah Padishaham.
In the name of God, my Sultan. This innocent child, whose father was just dragged away screaming, is now the emperor of this vast, volatile empire.
But the child's reign must be immediately consecrated by ritual, circumcision.
And Habe Suleiman is deeply involved. He carries the child to his bed after the ceremony, feeling the weight and the destiny of the future world ruler in his arms.
But that moment of pride is immediately shattered.
Habe Suleiman later finds the boy pale, the bed soaked in blood. The bandages were deliberately cut. The chief surgeon saves the child just in time, but the source of the treachery is immediately clear.
After a brief suspicion falls on Habe Suleiman himself, he was the last one to carry the child, the evidence points to the only person who visited the room after him.
The Grand Valide Sultan, the boy's own grandmother.
And Habe Suleiman, using his extensive intelligence network and his spy, the Circassian girl Safi, confirms the unthinkable. The woman who engineered the coup against her own son was now trying to murder her own grandson.
Why? Why such a radical, repeated betrayal of her own bloodline?
It was pure ambition and the preservation of her own power. She deposed her son because he had begun to disrespect her, canceled her orders, and spent all his time with that enormously fat concubine.
He even threatened to exile the Grand Valid Sultan to the old palace.
Right. But the murder attempt on the child sultan was motivated by his mother, the new Valid Sultan, who proved too strong and willful. She was blocking the grandmother's influence.
So the older Grand Valid Sultan decided the best political course was to eliminate both of them, to crush the head of the serpent while it was small.
And before she fully plots the next murders, the Grand Valid Sultan exacts this specific, highly personal revenge on the former sultan's favorite.
The world's fattest woman, an Armenian concubine.
The Grand Valid Sultan offers the concubine a choice of death drowning in a sack at Saraburnu or nonstop eating.
And the concubine chooses eating. Maybe she was convinced she could outlast the ordeal.
It's a grotesque form of psychological torture. She's forced to consume massive amounts of food, mutton, legs, roast chickens, pilafs, desserts continuously for 3 days and 3 nights.
Servants replace shifts, ensuring she never stops, never sleeps.
The narrator describes her fate so vividly. She swells into a live, breathing mound, an unrecognizable mountain of flesh, and dies only after begging desperately for a sip of water.
Having literally eaten herself to death.
This specific revenge just demonstrates the depth of cruelty that was possible within the harem. The Valid Sultan uses the victim's primary source of pleasure against her, turning indulgence into a fatal weapon.
It's a powerful statement about the ruthless nature of female power within the gilded cages of the palace.
So moving into the heart of the dilemma, Habbe Suleiman's involvement in the plot to save the child leads inevitably to his own temporary downfall.
Which ironically sets the stage for his most profound personal change.
After he reveals the Grand Valid Sultan's plot to the child's protectors, she turns on him. And Habbe Suleiman, the man who believed himself above all human weakness, is thrown into a dark, foul-smelling stone dungeon beneath the palace.
And in this dungeon, he undergoes a total psychological regression. He's stripped of his dignity, his status. He reverts to his true identity, calling himself a vile, pathetic slave.
A Noxani Tiar whose life is meaningless. He contemplates suicide.
But the thought of suicide brings him right back to the shattered jar and the question of eternal damnation. He fears that as an incomplete man, he can't enter paradise.
He reflects on his extensive knowledge, connecting the Latin word testis, the male organ, to testamentum, meaning oath or testimony. He recalls the ancient tradition of swearing oaths upon the organ.
So his scholarly knowledge just reinforces his theological fear. He needs to be whole to testify before God.
His life is saved by his loyal spy, Safé, the Circassian girl who intervenes and pleads on his behalf.
The Grand Valid Sultan, recognizing that a loyal, terrified servant is far more valuable than a dead one, visits his cell.
She accepts his abject submission and his renewed oath of servitude and releases him.
And Habbe Suleiman emerges from that dungeon, chastened, fiercely loyal to the Valide Sultan, but still focused on the only path that ensures his personal power, reinstating his original master, the deposed Sultan.
He immediately returns to visiting his former master, who remains locked in that tiled room, just descending into madness.
The Sultan is in this profound state of despair. He's alternating between reading the Quran, weeping, and clinging to this delusion that his mother, the very woman who plotted his demise, is actively working to save him.
And Habbe Suleiman controls the Sultan's reality through these carefully chosen parables, or missal.
He draws them from Rumi and the Qisas-i-Miya, the stories of the prophets, and he tailors these morality tales to the Sultan's shifting moods.
He uses the powerful story of Harut and Marut, the angels sent to earth who fall because of desire, becoming slaves to the beautiful woman Zura.
And Zura uses the secret name of God she learned from them to fly to heaven and become the star Venus, while the angels were left to suffer.
Habbe Suleiman reveals his subtle manipulation, doesn't he? He says during the Sultan's days of power, he would have altered the ending, claiming Allah forgave the angels.
But now, in the Sultan's misery, he tells the bitter truth of their eternal, miserable punishment, reinforcing the current feeling of hopeless confinement.
This narrative control gives Habbe Suleiman the confidence to move forward with his final, desperate political maneuver.
He believes the stability of the state and his own future depends on the Sultan's return.
Which brings us to the agonizing moral and political climax of the whole story. Habbe Suleiman presents his infallible plan for the Sultan's immediate return to power.
The plan is ruthless. It's based entirely on Nizam-i-Alam, the Order of the Realm. That terrifying Ottoman state principle that dictated stability was paramount, even if it meant fratricide.
The logic is simple. The Sultan's two sons, the child Sultan and his brother, are the only remaining male heirs. They must be poisoned.
And if the last remaining male members of the dynasty are eliminated, the council would have no choice but to release the imprisoned Sultan and place him back on the throne,
to ensure the continuation of the ruling house. And Habib Suleiman, the architect of this necessary cruelty, would then rise to be the first Black Grand Vizier.
But what is so fascinating here is the Sultan's reaction. The Sultan, who had previously murdered mercilessly during his rule, is utterly appalled by the proposal.
He screams, "Did you think about what it means to kill a child?"
And he reveals this deep, haunting trauma that has defined his entire life since his own enthronement, watching his younger brothers being strangled by the silk cord.
He describes their innocent eyes bulging and their tiny feet kicking the air.
This childhood trauma resurfaces, and it just overrides all political self-interest. He tells Habib Suleiman that he cannot condemn his own children to this fate.
He chooses their survival over his own life and the throne. He chooses to be a martyr sultan.
And Habib Suleiman, the self-proclaimed Kamal Insan, whose plan was infallible, based on the logic of history and power, is completely stunned.
The sultan's unexpected compassion, a quality he had never exhibited while on the throne, it just shatters the eunuch's meticulous planning and his dreams of becoming the first Black Grand Vizier.
This is the profound thematic core of the novel. The ruthless logic of statecraft, embodied by the eunuch's vast knowledge, is defeated by the unpredictable, inexplicable intervention of human mercy.
His knowledge of power was absolute, but his understanding of the human heart was fatally incomplete.
And the eunuch cannot accept this defeat. He can't accept the loss of power or the Sultan's decision to accept an ignoble death. So Habib Suleiman chooses political reality over moral virtue, initiating the final, irreversible betrayal.
He goes directly to the Grand Valid Sultan.
Feigning loyalty to her and concern for the state's stability, he reports that the people of Istanbul are stirring, demanding the return of the imprisoned Sultan due to the instability of the child ruler.
The Grand Valid Sultan, steeped in the logic of Nizam-Alam, she immediately understands the implication.
Habib Suleiman's calculated information signs the deposed Sultan's death warrant. A potential rallying point for unrest must be eliminated for the order of the realm.
So Habib Suleiman has now betrayed the man he idolized, ensuring his execution in this final, twisted attempt to exert control over a destiny he could no longer manipulate.
And knowing the execution is imminent, Habib Suleiman returns to the tiled room for one last meeting. He's determined to grant the Sultan the glorious exit he desires.
He speaks to the Sultan of the glory awaiting him, fabricating this narrative of heroism, describing him as a martyr sultan whose memory will be cherished.
And the Sultan is resigned. He accepts that his death, for a ruler, must be worthy of his royal status.
He clings to the illusion of popular support, asking Habib Suleiman to speak more about how much the people love him and pray for his safety.
And here comes the moment of absolute heart-wrenching humility that just destroys Habib Suleiman.
The Sultan, wax pale and frail from imprisonment, pushes his bony hand through the small slot in the bricked-up door.
He grabs Habib Suleiman's old black hand and kisses it.
And the Sultan addresses the slave not as a servant, but as Lala, a term reserved for an esteemed tutor or a vizier, and thanks him.
This is the ultimate recognition, the highest title the Sultan could possibly grant.
And Habib Suleiman is shattered. A king who commanded the world kissing the hand of a castrated slave who has just condemned him to death.
He leaves, knowing he has murdered the one man who chose fatherhood over empire, sacrificing his soul for the continuation of a system that defines him only by his mutilation.
The narrative provides a final historical irony by describing the ultimate end of the Grand Valid Sultan. It just reinforces this theme of cyclical violence and the futility of ambition.
She achieved ultimate power by deposing her son and trying to kill her grandson. Yet she is quickly betrayed. Janissaries corner her and strangle her with a curtain cord.
The same silk cord used to execute viziers and sultans.
Exactly. And the ultimate historical footnote: her vast, incalculable wealth, jewels, sables, florins found in 20 chests, is seized by the treasury.
The narrator's commentary on this enormous fortune reinforces the tragic wisdom of the age. The pocket of the shroud has no room.
You achieve nothing permanent through power. And this cyclical violence, this dazzling, deadly focus on power, is what Livaneli captures in the title, Angarisingazu, the Viper's Eye.
The viper's eye is that dazzling, blinding brilliance of absolute power, the glitter of the jewels, the authority that the eunuch fetishized.
And it is what captivates and paralyzes everyone drawn to the Sultan's court. Habe Suleiman is unable to look away from that fatal glitter. He achieves a sort of, negative redemption. The children live, thanks to the Sultan's mercy.
But only by causing the death of the man he loved and betrayed.
This has been an incredibly deep look into the darkness and complexity of the Ottoman harem. What stands out most profoundly is Livaneli's deep exploration of fear, power, and human nature within the seemingly divine structure of the empire.
It's a stunning depiction of how the state's principle of nizam alam, the absolute necessity for stability, becomes this self-consuming force that justifies the greatest evil against its own bloodline.
We saw how the terror instilled by preceding sultans, who enforced brutal bans on smoking and drinking with instant execution, shaped the generation that followed.
The deposed sultan's final, unexpected choice to protect his children was a result of his own childhood trauma finally overriding his political logic.
Which raises an important question for us to reflect on. In a world of absolute power, where logic and history dictate ruthlessness is the only path to survival, is true virtue, the father's final act of mercy, ultimately a fatal political weakness.
The novel suggests that the true horror of the Ottoman state wasn't just external cruelty, but its constant systemic requirement to betray its own heart.
This detailed analysis and synthesis of historical context and psychological narrative is exactly the level of insight you get when you follow the Daily Books YouTube channel's approach to literature.
Yeah. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Livaneli's masterpiece, make sure you seek out their excellent content.
And for you, our listener, we thrive on your curiosity. We love tackling complex narratives like this one. So please let us know what other compelling books and novels you want us to deep dive into next. Your suggestions directly shape our future deep dives.
And here's the essential paradox that this entire narrative leaves us with. Habe Suleiman possessed historical, religious, and linguistic mastery. His knowledge was absolute.
And yet, his meticulously planned, infallible scheme failed completely due to the unpredictable, irrational human factor, the Sultan's sudden, profound compassion.
So, if absolute historical knowledge cannot predict human mercy, what other essential, illogical truths are hidden in the fog of history that we continually miss?
Something potent to mull over until our next deep dive. Thank you for listening.